of It's All About Faith in Jesus, but we started talking about relationships. So, being the fact that I've been married not once, but actually twice, I can speak to things like I've had I'm only 43, but I've had a lot of life. And one of the things I can tell you about what to do in a marriage, what to not do in a marriage. I can give a lot of good advice because I've lived it. I've been married cumulatively for 20 years. It's a significant amount of time. In fact, I almost have been married as a married person longer than I was as a single person. And if you count like from 0 to 5, which doesn't really count anyway, yeah, I know only about being married really more than I know about not being married. So why do I mention that? Well, the point is that marriage and relationships have a lot of things, there's a lot of dynamics, a lot of moving parts. And so one of the challenges is, people are young, and I don't want to say stupid, but you kind of are. You're immature, and I know when I was younger, I hated being called immature. I hated people being like, "Oh yeah, well it's immaturity," and because it was like kind of shoved in my face. And what's stupid is there's nothing you can do about it. You're like, well, I'm not trying to be immature, but I guess if I'm not, I'm trying to get mature, but I am not there yet. And so all my life when I was younger, I hated when people would say that I was immature. So I try to, as a senior level kind of person in life now, I try not to make younger people feel like they're immature, just giving them opportunities of lessons learned and here's how you go forward. So that, in a relationship, we talked yesterday briefly about, what was the first topic? So it was selfishness, right? So selfishness in a relationship is definitely a no-go. Well, today we're going to expand on that. We're going to talk about pride. So pride, as you know in the Bible, it talks about pride comes before a fall, right? That's a phrase everybody's heard. If you look at, I'm going to pick on someone named Cam Newton. Cam Newton's a famous football player. He was a very prideful, proud kind of guy. He acted like he was the greatest, and he had one of the most amazing entrances or beginnings to a professional football player. And so, long story short, he's not playing football anymore. He got his shoulder torn by being sacked by one of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and now he's a person reporting on football. So Cam Newton is, as a football watcher, I can tell you I've watched some of these, watched Cam Newton play, and him as a person, from what he displays on TV and the way he behaves, he seems like, at least we'll say younger. I can't speak to him now, but he was kind of a very selfish and very prideful person. His, like, when I score a touchdown, I'll do the Superman thing and, act like I'm all that. Again, when you are listed as the best, or you're told that you are one of the best, if not the best, you kind of get what they call a chip on your shoulder, right? And so in a marriage, there's a lot of things that people do so wrong right off the bat. One of the things is pride has a way of kind of dominating. And what I mean by that is I know better. So my knowledge and how I do things is better than your way. That's a prideful way of thinking. For example, you always want to talk about things in a relationship, like what you're going to do or how it's going to work. You want to discuss them in a very casual sense. You don't want to say, well, my parents did it this way, or I want to do it that way, because you're putting the other person kind of almost already on a defense. And so pride is what you need to learn how to eliminate if you want a solid relationship. So if you're sitting there and you find that you're like, well, I think it's this way and I know best, that is a trigger for you to think, hey, wait a minute, that's pride talking. Because even if you may know best, if you're trying to get another person to cooperate with your way of doing things, you need to learn to negotiate. Because if I either marriage that I've had, in my first marriage, if I would have tried to order my wife around, that would have been met with a lot of opposition, instant. And so she would have been like, yeah, now I'm not doing it just because you want me to. That is how she would have gone. My wife now would shut down very likely and maybe do that, but I would feel like I was ignoring or not putting her needs first, and so, or she would flat out, she'd be like, I'm not doing that either. So that's not how I would ever approach a situation and say, we should, or I want to do it this way. So there, in a couple's relationship, I actually had marriage counseling years ago, and it was so, in a conversation, there are two things you got to stop doing. And one of them is using power words. It's what I call, my family, we call it power words, okay? Power words are kind of finite. Like, so for example, you always, or I never. But those forever words, always, never, those are power words. And those should never, there it is, those should never come out. Don't use power words in your speak when you're in a relationship. The other thing is, don't ever use the word you. You always, that's like, put someone, if you could be in a best situation, then boom, now you're on the defense. Never use you always. That is or I never. Again, that like the worst combination possible is putting those two together. So instead, we always, instead of I or you, think we. We really should figure this out together. That puts the other person on your team instead of on the fence. So we should really talk about this more, or we should consider how to do this better. Or you can always say, my first wife and I, we were learning how to do this, and so we had a word that we use the word feel. When someone says, I feel like you're not hearing me, that is one of those like kind of a friendly trigger to say, hey, we're talking and you're not hearing what I'm saying, and so let's kind of like back up this conversation a little bit before anybody gets heated or upset. But the point is, you've got to learn in your relationship, pride starts with I, togetherness and not being prideful is we. So think of yourself in a relationship as a team. You want to have team efforts to get everything done, because there's a lot of things that go wrong or are challenging in life in general, but marriage has a lot of targets on its back. I don't know why, it just does. But maybe because God likes marriage and obviously the devil does not. So that said, in your life today, here's your challenge for today. When you're in a relationship and you're going to try to use the word we. Listen for those power words forming either in your head and stop them and try to avoid them if all possible. Never use never. Never use always. Okay? You always, I never. Those are, like I said, just cut. I promise you, you start doing that, you're going to see a different person start to show up in